Good afternoon, members of the media, the wider listening audience. Thank you very much for joining us for today's post-cabinet media conference. Today, I have been asked to address yourselves and the wider public on the issue of the passing of the late Prime Minister, Mr. Patrick Augustus Mervyn Manning. As the public is very aware, Mr. Manning passed away on July 2nd, which was Saturday, and the Manning family graciously accepted the Honourable Prime Minister's invitation and offer of a state funeral. So a state funeral is being held for Mr. Manning on Saturday, and I'd just like to talk a little bit briefly about what is taking place coming up to that. As you would be aware by this time, a decision was taken to have Mr. Manning's body lie in state in NAPA South today, and that has been ongoing during the course of today, starting from 10 o'clock this morning. And tomorrow, it is going to be at NAPA North from 10 o'clock. And prior to arriving at NAPA North tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, where the Prime Minister and other members of Cabinet will be present, along with His Excellency the President, the Honourable Chief Justice, and other dignitaries at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Mr. Manning's body will be in procession and passing places like the Waterfront, the Magnificent Seven, and other historic buildings that would have played an important role in Mr. Manning's illustrious career. As the country is aware, Mr. Manning was the longest-serving parliamentarian, and we are happy to be able to provide him with an appropriate thank you on behalf of all of those whose lives he influenced, that is the nation of Trinidad and Tobago, the wider region, etc. The Honourable Prime Minister returned this morning from a CARICOM Heads of Summit in Guyana, and he was pleased to inform us that the vast majority, if not all, of our CARICOM neighbouring sister countries are either having their heads of state, their heads of government, or an appropriately high-ranking level of government attend the funeral for Mr. Manning on Saturday. So, just to tell you all very briefly the decisions that were taken at Cabinet this morning with respect to this, the Prime Minister, on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, did extend, and Mr. Manning's family did accept the offer of a state funeral to be conducted in his honour. A request has been made of the Anglican Diocese to explore the possibility of having Mr. Manning's body entombed on the compound of the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, Port of Spain. An interministerial committee chaired by the head of the public service and the permanent secretary to the Prime Minister has been established. I am a member of that committee. We've been meeting. In fact, we were meeting up to a short while ago, and I'll tell you the outcome of some of those meetings. The proceedings of the state funeral are as follows. 1. The state funeral service at the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, Port of Spain, will be held on Saturday, July 9th, 2016 at 10 a.m. There will be a private service for the family at Belgrove's Orange Grove Memorial Gardens, Tacarigua, to be followed by the final committal. The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has offered to meet the total expenses to be incurred with respect to this state funeral. Mr. Manning's body, as the former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, will be entombed on the compound of the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, Port of Spain. The government of Trinidad and Tobago will be meeting the costs associated with the provision of transport and security to be assigned to the various representatives of government of CARICOM member states. Mr. Manning's body will be carried on a gun carriage. He will be afforded full military honours, including a 10-gun salute. His body, as I said, is lying in honour at the National Academy for the Performing Arts South Campus today, and in state at the National Academy for the Performing Arts North Campus tomorrow. Colours will form part of the procession. As you all are aware, the flags, our national flag, had been directed to be flown at half-mast since last week Saturday until the funeral, which will be this Saturday, and that's not only here but at all our foreign missions as well. The President's standard is to be lowered and replaced by the national flag, which is then flown at half-mast. The national flag will be placed over Mr. Manning's coffin as though the pole was at the head of the coffin. And as I said, we shall be covering the costs. Now, In terms of managing expectations and just giving some forewarning, the cathedral can comfortably, with a bit of a squeeze, hold about a maximum of 925 to 950 people. As you would imagine, with this amount of dignitaries, foreign heads of government, our own head of state and head of government, and other dignitaries who will be present, there are security and logistical aspects to be dealt with. So therefore, the number from 925 would be reduced in the cathedral. What has been arranged is for the placement of some very large tents that can accommodate 1,200 people right on the outskirts of the cathedral, and then further accommodation via tents and seating to be made in Woodford Square. So what we'd like the public and the members who are hoping to be invited, etc., to understand is we're seeing the service as extending beyond the cathedral, because we have limited seating and limited numbers that can comfortably and securely and safely be accommodated at the cathedral. There will be specially invited sections, guest sections, under these tents that I've referred to, and we're hoping that across the country we're making arrangements for large screen televisions to be placed at strategic points throughout the country for members of the public to view. And when Mr. Manning's body is being led tomorrow to end up at NAPA for 10 a.m., we're hoping that people would line the streets and pay their regards to him. So the point is that because of this limited availability of space, invitations are being sent out in accordance with the accepted protocol list, which you all would all be aware of, and we're following that protocol list. And then, of course, the next priority would be the list of specially invited guests by the Manning family. And those would be the persons accommodated within the cathedral's walls, but we want people to understand the service goes beyond the cathedral's walls, and there will be provision of specially invited guest facilities under some of these tents that I've just mentioned. We would ask the public to bear with us, because there are bound to be some traffic issues and some other logistical issues over the next couple of days. But this is for us as a nation to pay our last respects to a great visionary and someone who did so much, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, for the wider region and also internationally. I'd also like to use this opportunity to thank the public servants who have been working tirelessly and with great effort. In fact, they continue to be meeting upstairs right now to make sure that everything goes in accordance with the best possibly arranged plans. They should be singled out and thanked, because since last week Saturday, when we received this unfortunate news, they have been working around the clock, including the whole of yesterday. We were in meetings and they were having discussions, etc., to try and finalize the list and all of the logistical items that need to take place to make Mr. Manning's last rites and sending off a success. So on behalf of the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, I'd like to thank all of the public servants who are involved in this process, including our Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Chief Protocol Officer, members from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, the Office of the Prime Minister, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Communication, Ministry of National Security, and all of the other agencies that are playing a very important part and role in making Saturday a success as we send Mr. Manning off with the last final rites that he so deserves. Having said that, that is my announcement for today, and we look forward to the success over the next couple of days, culminating with the funeral and the laying of Mr. Manning on Saturday. I'll provide an opportunity for a few brief questions.
Minister Young, the Amity from CNMG, who is expected to give the eulogy at the funeral on Saturday?
The program has been settled by the family, and from my recollection, I believe the eulogy will be given by one of his sons, and then a special word from, I believe, Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves. Our Prime Minister will also say a few words, the President will say a few words as well. I don't have the final program in front of me, but from my recollection, that is what we're looking at.
Okay, you also mentioned that the state is prepared to cover the entire cost of the funeral? Are you in a position to state how much it's going to cost?
Not at this stage, but I can tell you I spent parts of yesterday negotiating costs downwards. So as with everything this government has been doing, we are managing it as tightly as possible.
Mr. Joel Brown from TV6 News, was there a plan for a state funeral that the government worked with that was already written out, or is it that you had to make it up as you went along?
Absolutely not. I'm glad to advise that yes, as we already have a list of protocol and these types of things, there was a program that we were presented with on Saturday last, which sets out all of the checklist items for a state funeral. There are some items of discretion as you go along. And of course, Mr. Manning not being in the seat as the Prime Minister when he passed away, we have afforded him, at the request of the Honourable Prime Minister Dr. Rowley and at the acceptance of the family, a number of additional rights to make it into a state funeral. But yes, Jewel, there was a checklist, and they are very, very well set out precedent for what takes place with regard to a state funeral that we're following.
So for those who may wonder, let's say the delay between Mr. Manning's death, the announcement that there will be a state funeral, and the announcement of details, the gap.
Well, I disagree. I don't think there's any gap. Again, fortunately, I was on the ground and part of that process. When we got the news around 8:30 on Saturday morning last that Mr. Manning had passed away at 8:15, immediately things got into the gear. The Honourable Prime Minister took a decision and relayed that decision, which was requesting of the family, providing an opportunity to the family to accept a state funeral. Of course, as you would expect, the family being in an immediate grief and period of mourning, they were given their time and their space to contemplate it, to have their own internal discussions and get back to us on that. But straight away on Saturday afternoon, and that's in between myself and other members of the government having a media conference and running from station to station, we met this interministerial cabinet team with the assistance of the head of the public service. We met straight away on Saturday afternoon, and that program that I told you about formed the agenda, and we began going through the line items. But as you would expect with a holiday, a public holiday falling in the middle of the week yesterday, and you have to get, it's a number of things have to get in place. Traffic branch, the special branch, the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, the members of the Coast Guard, etc., for all of the full military rights they have to practice, etc., and then going out and getting the facilities, the tents, the programs, looking at the various places. The family had to choose where they would like it, and we've been able to arrange all of that in a very short time frame. When you consider, as of this morning in NAPA South, there was the body already being displayed. The condolence books were opened from Sunday morning. The president started, then signed by the Prime Minister, and it went down the list. So all of that was put in place, and I really would like to use the opportunity to thank the public servants for working around the clock to make it the success that it's been without any hiccups so far.
I just want to know the ceremony, of course, in the church, the funeral service in the church, will, of course, I would imagine dignitaries and so on would be there, but members of the wider public, that is what the Waterfront Square area would be assigned for. And what can members of the public expect if they are going into Port-of-Spain for the funeral?
The exact traffic plans, I am not aware of them as yet, but that's why I took the time to say very carefully that the church can only comfortably accommodate about 920 people. And when you start to do extrapolation and the multiplication, and including foreign dignitaries, that very quickly dissipates. So we don't want persons to feel if you're not inside the church, you're not part of the intimate part of the ceremony. That's simply not so. The tents on the outside and Woodford Square and the screens that will be placed, etc., are going to include everyone into this. And right now what we're doing is we're going through the process. As we speak, I just ran down from doing that, of settling the final list.
Are there plans to rename the waterfront in Mr. Manning's honor?
As I say, things have been happening very, very quickly. The government has not met and had discussions about how we will further honor Mr. Manning and his legacy as yet.
I'll just follow up my colleague's question with another one. Are there any plans, not just the waterfront, but any state facility, is that being considered to be renamed after Mr. Manning?
As I just said, this has not come up for discussion or consideration as yet. A lot of things have just been taken place. The dust will settle, and I'm certain we as a government will get around to having those discussions within a very short time frame.
Ray Davis for 102.1 FM. Good afternoon, Mr.
Afternoon.
Minister. Mr. Minister, could you give us an idea of who are some of the high-ranking international officials who will be attending this year?
I would prefer not to. I'd actually asked that question this morning when I met with the Prime Minister, the substantive Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, because I was acting for him in his absence. And we prefer to get confirmation before we start to make those such announcements.
In the context of what is happening with the people in Tobago, you have mentioned what is happening in Woodford Square. What is being transmitted or what is there for the people of Tobago in the context of the funeral service?
Well, again, understandably because of the short time frame and the whole logistical detail that needs to go in and resources of moving the body, Mr. Manning's body, between Trinidad and Tobago. It is not that Tobago has been left out, but just in this short time frame, this is what was put together. All of the members of the Tobago House of Assembly, we've been going through the list, etc., and a number of Tobagonians, etc. We expect to participate in the funeral service over here in Trinidad and Tobago. I am not certain, but I feel sure that there will also be the provision of screens at strategic points in Tobago as well.
In the context of Mr. Manning's hospitalization, was there any approach by his family to have government involved in perhaps an upgrade of his medical treatment?
Again, I don't have the exact details of that, but to cast everyone's mind back to last week, which is when this took place, there was a very, very short time frame between Mr. Manning's admittance and his untimely passing on the Saturday morning. So again, I think it was just a quick passage of time on what was taking place, but I don't know of any specific approach to the government for assistance.
You did indicate that, of course, it's too early perhaps to indicate whether any facility or any structure would be named in honor of the late former Prime Minister. Any consideration by Cabinet is straight away for any national award to be bestowed on the gentleman posthumously?
Again, that has not come up for discussion. It has been a very, very, I think people are forgetting how short the week has been with this happening on Saturday, us moving straight into the making of the arrangements. The substantive Prime Minister, as you're aware, set off on early Monday morning and has just returned today. So I am certain these would form part of our deliberations in a very, very short time frame.
You did say a short while ago, Minister, the traffic plans.
Correct.
You don't have that, those exact plans.
I know Hart Street is being blocked off, right? So that much I'm aware of. But I am certain that sufficient police resources would be put in place to try and make the traffic situation as seamless as possible. One of the benefits of having it on a Saturday is you don't have the type of level of traffic volume in this capital city as you would have, for example, on a Friday. But let us all be aware of it. I am certain prior to that, the appropriate announcements would be made either by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service or the Ministry of Communication.
But the public could expect some announcement on those details.
Absolutely.
Soon, today?
I would have thought so. I would have thought so.
Yes, I might have come in a bit late on this, Minister, but so is there, I take it that in terms of tributes at the funeral itself, it will be the Prime Minister, President, and...
You did come in late, Clint. We did say, I don't have the final program in front of me, but that is a decision, as you would expect, and as we respect, of the Manning family. I can confirm, yes, His Excellency the President, yes, the Honourable Prime Minister, the eulogy and other intimations would be from his family, his sons, his close friend, Mr. Ralph Gonzalez, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and there are a couple others. What I do know is that Mrs. Manning was very, very clear that she did not want it to be a very stretched out service.
Okay. So, and we know that there's going to be a private burial ceremony at the end of it. So
correct.
That event taking place in San Fernando.
That event will be in Tacarigua. But as I also just announced, the government is in conversation with the Anglican Church because Mrs. Manning had requested, the family had requested that Mr. Manning's body find its final resting place at the cathedral. And so far, it seems that we will be proceeding along those grounds, but that will take some preparation.
Cathedral as in the Holy Trinity Cathedral?
Yes.
Okay, but why Taco Rico as being considered?
That is where the funeral home of the funeral service provider is based, Belgroves.
Just clarifying, Minister, apart from those who will be speaking, invitation will have been extended for the church, inside the church, to members of the opposition, and
Correct.
Who else would have been invited to the church?
Well, as I said, I mean, what we're using in a state, and because it is a state funeral, what you use is you use the list of precedents, right? The protocol list. So you start off on that list with His Excellency, then the Prime Minister, then the Chief Justice, then the President of the Senate, then the Speaker, then Cabinet Minister. So that is the list that we're following, and we're going down. But of course, as I keep saying, there's a cutoff point in terms of numbers, and at some stage you marry that with the request of the Manning family. The request of the Manning family did run into a few hundreds. So, you know, we have to give that priority. So at some stage there is a cutoff point, and we're in the process, as I speak, of finalizing that.
In the context of Cabinet's meeting today, were you all overwhelmed by preparation for the state funeral, or was there another consideration, for example, for our financial picture, given the fact that it has been indicated that the Minister of Finance and the team are to go on a road trip trying to get our finances in order?
The Cabinet was not overwhelmed with this preparation. There is an interministerial team and committee dealing with this, and we have been working assiduously on it. Cabinet was a normal Cabinet session, and yes, there were considerations given to both the financial aspects and many other aspects of the normal governance of Trinidad and Tobago. But as you are aware, the Honourable Minister of Finance at the end of this month will be going on a road trip that we, by all indications, we expect it to be a success.
In the context of what is happening with crime and the continuing prevalence of gun crimes in particular, what is there that is the government thinking about getting a full handle on this situation?
Well, you know, as we've said time and time again, the government is here to meet with the heads and to provide whatever resources can be done, and maybe to provide some sort of strategic policy guidelines, etc. It is something at the top of the agenda. In fact, we will be meeting as a National Security Council in the next coming days, and we will be dealing with some of these issues.
In the context of the bail bill, and not going through in Parliament recently, what is government forward approach in this regard?
Well, I think as the Attorney General is on record, and as I certainly was on record sitting right here a few weeks ago of saying, we place that responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the opposition. They were the ones who had driven the legislation and had it as the acts. We provided in Parliament as part of the debate, I provided the statistics of none other than a cry from the Acting Commissioner of Police as to why this should continue as a tool in the fight against crime. I think history has overtaken us. The opposition did not support it. In my humble opinion, they did not provide the population with a sufficient reasonable reason as to why they did not support it, especially when you have the Commissioner of Police giving sworn evidence and sworn evidence and testimony saying that the reoccurrence of crimes being committed with firearms and in relation to anti-gangs, etc. They needed this as a tool, so we did the best we could as a government, but as the population was aware, it required a special majority. We did what was mandated of us in terms of taking the legislation forward, and as history shows and as past us now, it was just as simple asking for an extra 2 years for us to then work with the authorities to see what can be done. But for me, the most telling thing was that the person in charge of law enforcement in Trinidad and Tobago, the Acting Commissioner, Mr. Stephen Williams, made a plea for the continuation of this via sworn testimony, and it was ignored by the opposition.
So then, Minister, what is the government's next step in this regard?
Well, the law reverts. I think it is on the 15th or the 16th of August. The law will revert back to what it was, as the Attorney General said, 22 years ago. The Attorney General and the team of drafts people at our Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs are looking at what other pieces of legislation can be brought. But the truth is, that was the ideal one in terms of it was simply an extension of a sunset clause. So it was the existing status status quo of law. And as you would expect, any other legislation affecting those rights would require a special majority. So if for a simple extension, the opposition has shown the country that they were not prepared to support it, we will have to consider that very carefully going forward. But it does not completely tie the hands of law enforcement. We must continue to evolve and continue to morph and do what needs to be done to fight this scourge of crime.
And just going back to the earlier point where you had asked about the issue of the economy, the issue of back pay, members of the protective services and members of the public service. You did have members of the PSA and health workers protesting outside the parliament, saying that the government was favoring members of the protective services over those in the public service.
Again, this is really something that's within the remit of the Minister of Finance, but I can say, from my knowledge, that is absolutely not so. The Ministry of Finance, under the guidance, direct guidance of the Minister of Finance, worked very hard, very assiduously to make sure that the money was there. I know that there were a number of issues with the logistical aspects and the administrative aspects. And quite simply, people did not do what they were supposed to do outside of the Ministry of Finance in terms of getting of all the forms filled out and calculating the figures, etc. But they continue to work towards ensuring, and as this government has said, all back pay will be paid, and that process is taking place.
And the source of the funding to get this back pay?
You'll have to direct that to the Minister of Finance. I don't have the specifics. I'll just take a couple more questions. Thanks.
Well, I just only have two left. Firstly, the thing is, as you mentioned with the bail bill, and we know that you have civil asset forfeiture and a whole set of other important legislation to deal with the higher end of crime, if you will.
Correct.
And some of these may very well require special majorities. So, is the government concerned that if the opposition can act the way that it did with the bail bill, that when these other bills come, that they will act in a similar way and thus frustrate the government's legislative agenda, specifically in terms of fighting crime?
Let me put it this way. This government is a sensible government, and we are very aware of the type of legislation that will require a special majority. And we don't intend to be hamstrung by any element of society in our efforts and our fight against crime, whether it be high-level white-collar crime, whether it be low-level crime, and all crime in between. So something like civil asset forfeiture, both the Honourable Attorney General, and myself have been introducing these concepts into the Parliament. We say on record, and we continue to say, that that type of legislation is an international requirement. Our FATF and our CFATF obligations, every single international arm, when I travel and the Attorney General travels, that we meet with, keeps reinforcing to us that we need to amend our legislation to have civil asset forfeiture. And I go on record again as stating here today that there can be no reasonable position put forward by anyone who has nothing to hide to avoid civil asset forfeiture legislation being amended and brought into place. Explain your wealth, reverse the burden of proof. So at the end of the day, we call upon the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to start asking the parliamentarians, why is it or isn't it that you will or you won't support this type of legislation that is a critical tool in the fight against crime. And it's not only high-level crime, but also, for example, with civil asset forfeiture. If you hold someone who is known to be a gang member or someone involved in the sale of illegal drugs, etc., it allows the state to then forfeit their assets, bring it into the treasury to then help towards the fight against crime. Why would that not be supported?
The other thing I wanted to ask, going back to Mr. Manning's state funeral, and it was mentioned a little while ago about him possibly being eventually buried in the Trinity, but is it possible for ordinary citizens, persons who aren't members of the clergy, to be buried in the cathedral?
You're asking me a question that, quite frankly, I'm not certain of the reason or the answer to, but that would be because ultimately it is private ground, so that would be a decision for the Anglican Church.
Mr. Minister, last but certainly least, I think, one aspect of the life in our country is this question of civil protests. poor roads, water distribution, and other services that are not coming up to mark as far as the people would say. Is the government aware of the need to nip these protests in the bud by doing something, saying something, acting on behalf of these people?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd like to say that the government does not support and does not encourage these types of protests. There are many, many other ways to deal with issues and problems before reaching that. So if there are issues going on, reach out to your members of parliament, reach out to your councillors. The only way for us to become a proper civil society and a first world nation is for us to have civil conversation to start with. So if there are grouses, if there are issues affecting you, reach out to those along the chain and ask for the help. To rush and have protests, etc., is, in my personal view, very destructive and is not productive. And we as a nation need to be a more productive society. So government is aware of grouses and issues, and the government should be working assiduously, and I'm sure my colleagues are in their various ministries, trying to do as much as can be done with the limited resources we found ourselves saddled with.
Just wondering, Minister, going back to the point my colleague had raised concerning civil asset forfeiture, what about any concerns in terms of the constitutionality of this overreach by the government in terms of persons acquiring wealth? In other words, the fear that innocent people who are doing the right thing being looked into a group of people who are not doing the right thing acquiring wealth.
Absolutely no need to have such fear. This is the type of legislation that is taking place across the world in every civilized society, and they're built-in protection guards. It's not for government to decide, I am seizing this. No, you go to court. So ultimately, the third cog of the separation of powers steps in, and the judiciary will be called upon to judge whether that order for forfeiture should be made. Explain your wealth is actually a reversal of the burden of proof. And the truth is, Jules, that if you have legitimate explanations for how you've achieved that wealth, it will be put forward and the court will decide and arbitrate on it and come to the right decision. If they don't, you have your process of appeal all the way to the Privy Council. So there are built-in levels of protection, but this is not something new. We're not reinventing the wheel. This applies all over the world. You go and do your research. It is applicable all over the world.
Just finally, so then would that be tied into the issue of campaign finance reform and declarations of contributions over a certain amount to political parties and campaigns?
Well, as we had said when we had our campaign finance conference, reform conference, we are looking now at the formulation of policy, and a part of that it will be transparency, and that people over certain amounts donated, their names may be made public, etc. And that just assists the public being aware of who has donated what, etc. going forward. I'd like to thank you all very, very much for your patience and for your continued contributions, and please stay safe, Trinidad and Tobago. Much appreciated.